Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having fun preparing for the UCAT. It's going to be one of the most dreadful part of your entire application, but I swear to God, you will get through it. So we're just going to give you a wee overview of this session. So this is the fourth UCAT workshop, which is specifically on decision making, which is the section right before situational judgment. And quick summary of last session. So it was on quantitative reasoning, and we went over question types, common pitfalls, tips and tricks, and also time management strategies. I'm not too sure if that session was recorded, but if it was, I'll make sure to share it at the end of this session for you guys to go over as well. And in today's session, we're going to be kind of following the same format as last time. So we're going to go over different question types, common pitfalls, tips and tricks, and also time management strategies. Like I mentioned previously, question types and techniques, and a little tour of our MedReadyGo website, and also attempt some questions from our website, top tips and tricks. And at the very end, we'll also have a Q&A session where you can ask any questions that you might have. Next slide, please. So like you guys may be already aware, this section tests your ability to make sound decisions and judgments from complex information. Personally, I found this section the most difficult out of the entire UCAT because there were so many question types to tackle. And obviously, you cannot nail every question types because some people may find different question types easier than others. Personally, I found syllogisms easier than logical puzzles. So in this section, it's very important that you understand your advantages and understand your strengths and work towards that instead of worrying about your weakness. This section has 37 minutes to answer 35 questions. And this is the most updated time frame based on the new UCAT changes, which was into play from last year when I did it. And also there are 6 main question types, which will be coming up in the next slide. The best section to use your whiteboard, and I highly recommend that you do use your whiteboard to illustrate the concepts and make diagrams and use arrow notation so that it's easier for you to visualize before answering the questions and just helps you stay calm and stop panicking. And finally, often the subsection where people spend the most time on a single question. It's best to flag and skip in this section. Just so you understand, not every question are of the same difficulty. Some might be harder and some might be easier. It just depends on the question type. For example, recognizing assumptions. They're much easier compared to logical puzzles. So since it's approximately 1 minute per question, if you're practicing enough, you could answer recognizing assumptions in like 30 seconds and spend that remaining time on harder questions like logical puzzles, if that makes sense. Next slide, please. So these are the main question types. And obviously you can get like sub question types and it just totally depends. But when you're looking at DM as a whole section, these are like the main ones. Syllogisms, which are presented with a series of statements, and you must decide whether the information in the question is supported by the statement. It sounds complicated, but I promise it kind of gets easier with practice. Logical puzzles, which is when you're given information about specific characteristics and must work out the answer. Evaluating arguments, where you're given a question and must decide which argument is strongest and address all parts of the question. You need to pay attention that you need to address all parts of the question and not just a little part of the question, because that's where most people trip up with this type of question specifically. Probabilities and statistical reasoning, where you're comparing different products or deciding whether a probability calculated is correct. And based off the feedback I got from Hamza, this was one of the most requested question types to go over. So I'll make sure that I go over all the probability rules so that you're familiar and then you get a refresh. We've got Venn diagrams, which are presented with information in a Venn diagram, which is like circles. So you might all be aware of this. And you need to answer questions based on this, or maybe like fill in the blanks, you know? And then finally, we've got interpreting information, which is where you're given data and answer questions based on this data. Next slide, please. So the first one, we've got syllogisms. There are two main methods that people use, Venn diagrams and arrow methods. Personally, I found using the arrow method easier when I was practicing, but it just depends on the person. So for this question, I'm just going to read over the question, give you guys a minute to try work it out, and then I'll go over it. All the fish in an aquarium are either large or small. All the large fish are striped, but not all the striped fish are large. Some of the small fish have sharp teeth. I'm just going to give you guys a minute to read over it. Okay, right. I'm going to go over each of the statements, and if you can't hear me, please put a message up on the chat so that I know. There are fewer large fish than striped fish. So this conclusion does follow because not all striped fish are large, but all the large ones are striped. Can I please move on to the next slide, please? Perfect, thank you. The second one, which is some striped fish have sharp teeth. This does not follow because we don't know. Always remember that you're not making assumptions when you're dealing with these types of questions, and do not bring your outside knowledge into answering these questions. For example, if in the statement it says the sky is yellow, the sky is yellow. And if it says the fishes can fly, the fishes can fly. Just believe it, don't argue with it. Just go with what they're saying. Does not follow because some or all of the small fish with sharp teeth might not be striped. The third one, if a fish has sharp teeth, it must be small. This does not follow because we don't know. Then again, we can't assume things. Some of the large fish might have sharp teeth too. The fourth one, at least one small fish is striped. This does follow because not all the striped fish are large. And finally, most of the fish have sharp teeth. This does not follow because we can't tell from the information provided. Then again, we can't make any assumptions. Does that make sense before I move on to the next question? I can't really see this chat, so Taz, if you can let me know if there are any questions.
No questions.
Perfect, moving on. Next slide, please. Then again, I'll read the statements, give you guys a minute to, go over it, and then we can go through them together. All corks have either feathers or fur, and are either tinks or meres. Most tinks have black fur, but all other tinks, as well as all of the meres, have brown feathers. Perfect. Next slide, please. So for this question specifically, I would personally use the arrow method. I'm just going to go over how I constructed this little diagram. Looking at the first statement, it says all corks have either feathers or fur and are either tinks or meres. So looking at the last bit of the first statement, it says that all corks are either tinks or meres. Therefore, I've written cork, and then I've got two branches, one for tink and then one for mere. Onto the second statement, it says most tinks have black fur, but all other tinks, as well as all of the meres, have brown feathers. Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm just perfect. All good? So for here,
Yep, good.
perfect. So for here, I've got two branches coming off of tink. The first branch says most tinks have black fur, so I've written it there. And then the second branch, I've got tinks with brown feathers. Same with mere. I've only got one branch coming off that says brown feathers. And then the rest are just brown feathers. So for the first statement, it says, all black tinks have fur. This does follow because bullet 2 says, most tinks have black fur, and those which are not black have brown feathers. So that makes sense. The second statement, any brown cork must be a mere. This does not follow because some brown corks are tinks. You can kind of use that diagram to work back up if the statement is like, you're trying to work in a reverse manner instead of a chronological order, if that makes sense. And then for the third statement, it says, some meres with fur are colored black. This does not follow because all meres have brown feathers. And then for the fourth statement, it says, none of the black corks have feathers. This does follow because all meres are brown, like we can see on our little arrow diagram, and any tinks which have feathers are also brown. And then for the final statement, it says, more corks have feathers than fur. This does not follow because there is no indication of how many corks have fur and how many have feathers. Like mentioned previously, please do not assume anything that's not mentioned in the questions, because that's how many people are confused, and this often trips people up in the actual UCAT when the time constraints are incredibly high and you've got no time to, second guess yourself. So always go with your gut feeling as well. And then for this types of question, you'll get half a mark if you get 4 out of 5 right, and then you get the full marks if you've got 5 out of 5 right. Next slide, please. Please do let me know if I'm going too fast and if you've got any questions. I can't really see the chat, so do we have any questions coming up?
Nope.
All right, perfect. So logical puzzles, this is the second type of question. See, for this question, when I just see this question, I just immediately know that I'm going to need to use my whiteboard because it would just make things easier. So on my whiteboard, I would just do 8 little boxes and take a note of all of the names mentioned in the question as well. Excuse me. Every year, MedReadyGo School has a school photograph taken. 8 teachers sit at the front in a row. Mr. Nunn sits 5th from the left with Mrs. O'Rourke and Mr. Percival. On either side, Mr. Rowley sits as far away from Mrs. O'Rourke as possible. Mr. Stevens sits next to Mr. Percival. Miss Zenza does not sit beside Mrs. O'Rourke or Mrs. Trollope. Mr. Warlock sits 3 seats away from Mr. Nunn. So before moving on to the statements, like I said, I would make little annotations on the 8 boxes. So reading the first statement. Next slide, please. Mr. Nunn sits 5th from the left. So immediately I'll look at the row and then count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then write N beside Mrs. O'Rourke, indicating that's where Mr. Nunn is currently sitting. From the left, with Mrs. O'Rourke and Mr. Percival on either side. So like it says on the statement, we've got Mr. Percival on the right side of Mr. Nunn, so we're going to write that in as well. Next slide, please. And then the second statement says, Mr. Rowley sits as far away from Mrs. O'Rourke as possible. So looking at the row, we've only got one possibility, so we're going to put Mr. Rowley on the far right as possible, like you can see. Next slide, please. And then we've got Mr. Stephen sits next to Mr. Percival. We've only got one possibility, so we're going to put Mr. Stephen beside Mr. Percival. And then we've got Miss Zenza does not sit beside Mrs. O'Rourke or Miss Trollope. So we're going to put Miss Zenza on the very left side for now. If we do have if we do have any changes, we'll think about that later. Mr. Warlock sits 3 seats away from Mr. Nunn. So counting 3 seats away from Mr. Nunn, we've got Mr. Warlock sitting beside Miss Zenza. And then finally, going back to the fourth statement that says, Miss Zenza does not sit beside Mrs. O'Rourke or Mrs. Trollope. So there's only one possibility for Mrs. Trollope. There's only one possibility for Miss Trollope. So we're going to put her beside Mrs. O'Rourke. And then, if we can see that all of our little boxes are filled with the names, and we think this might be true. So now we're going to go over the statements. Option A. Miss Zenza sits at the far left of the row. Like we can see in the diagram, that is correct. However, we're going to go over the other options as well. In the actual UCAT, please do not waste your time going over each of the question if you think option A is correct. But for now, since I'm explaining how I would do this, I'm just going to go over all 4 statements. Option B, Mr. Stephen sits next to Mrs. O'Rourke. That is not true, because like we can see in the diagram, he sits to the right beside Mr. Rowley. Option C, Mr. Warlock sits next to Mr. Percival. That is not true, because he sits beside Miss Zenza and Miss Trollope. And finally, Miss Trollope sits at the far right of the row. As you can see, that is not true, so we're not going to choose that answer. And next slide, please. Like we said, option A is the correct answer, because Miss Zenza sits to the far left. And if you do have any questions on this specific question, please let me know in the chat. If I've not explained it enough, or you guys found something difficult to understand, please do let me know. All good?
No questions.
Perfect. So the second type of question in logical puzzle we've got. So this one, when I see this type of question, I just immediately think that I would do a little grid or like a little table so that I've got my information correctly, well organized. But obviously with practice, you get better at recognizing what type of technique to use depending on the question. It's not something you would initially understand when you're starting off. It takes time, but do not worry, you'll get there. 5 friends had a midday meal together. The meal consisted of 3 courses and a drink each. They consumed the following items: starter course, 2 soups, 1 garlic mushrooms, 2 prawn cocktails. Main course, 2 pizzas, 2 fish dishes, 1 curry. Dessert course, 2 trifle, 2 plum crumbles, 1 blackcurrant meringue. Drinks, 1 coffee, 2 teas, 2 chocolates. The items the friends enjoyed the most were, items the friends enjoyed most of all were: Annie had pizza, plum crumble, and tea. Becky had soup, a fish dish, and chocolate drink. Fran had prawn cocktail, a fish dish, and chocolate drink. Mel had garlic mushrooms, pizza, and a tea. Paula had soup and plum crumble. Which combination of these food and drink items did Paula choose? So I'm going to give you guys a minute to think about how you would construct this table, or if you would use a different technique. And if you would use a different technique, please do let me know in the chat so that we can share it with others. But I'm just going to give you guys a minute to think about this question. Next slide, please.
Okay, we've got Angie, sorry if I said your name wrong, who said they would skip and flag this question immediately, which I would actually agree with, just given how much information there is. I think
Yes.
Chana can talk to you more about that.
So in the actual UCAT, I would follow their recommendation as well, because this is very content heavy and it's probably not an easy question to do when you're in that time constraint. But since we're just going over the types of question, I'm just giving you a wee taster of all of the types of questions you can expect. But yes, I highly recommend that you flag and skip this question. So this is the grid I constructed. As you can see, it's very organized. We've got individual columns, person, starter, main set. But in the actual UCAT, it's going to take like 5 minutes to construct this entire table with this much of precision. So it should be like a really rough sketch, or you can skip this question. So we're going to go over each of the options and see why or why not we would choose the following answer options. So which combination of these food and drink items did Paula choose? Option A, we've got pizza and drink. So like we can see in the grid, it cannot be option A because pizza, we've got Annie and Meg having pizzas. And when we look back at the statement, it says there's only 2 pizzas. So that cannot be the main for Paula. And tea, we've got 2 teas already taken by Annie and Meg. So option A is not the answer. We'll go option B, curry and chocolate drink. So if we look at the table, there's no one taking curry for main. And in the statements, it says that 1 curry was taken. So we're just going to guess that Paula has taken the curry for her main. And we've got chocolate drink. We've got 2 people taking the chocolate drink, Becky and Man. And if we go back to the statement, it says that 2 chocolate drinks were taken. So Paula cannot have the chocolate drink. And then option C, we've got fish and tea. We've got 2 people taking fish for their main, Becky and Man. If we look at the statements, it says that we've got 2 fish dishes. So therefore, Paula cannot have fish for her main. And then tea, like I said previously, 2 teas taken, Annie and Meg, so she cannot have tea. And the final option, curry and coffee. So this might be the answer because curry is taken by none, and there's only 1 curry in the statement, so she is taking the curry. And then for coffee, there's only 1 coffee, and no one else is taking it, so therefore Paula must have taken the coffee. Does that make sense? Any questions?
No questions.
Perfect. Next slide, please. So before I go over this question, I'm just going to go over some basic probability rules so that you guys have a brief understanding. So probability is basically just favorable outcomes over total outcomes. And if a question has the keyword and, you just automatically think that it's multiply because both events happen. For example, if you're tossing a coin and then you're tossing a coin and then the question says you get two heads in a row. So what you're doing is you're multiplying a half by a half to get a quarter. And then or, which is the key word, you automatically think that you need to add. It's because either events happen. For example, if a question says you roll 1 or 2 in a die, what you do is you add 1/6, and you add another 1/6 to get 2/6, which is equivalent to a third. And then if a question says not, you just automatically think that it's 1 take away the probability. And then for at least 1, you just automatically think it's 1 take none, because at least 1 head in 2 flips is like 1 take a half times a half, which gives you 3/4. And then with replacement, for example, in a draw, you're taking 1 ticket out and then you replace it with another ticket, the possibility remains the same. However, if it's without replacement, the probabilities do change. And then we've got conditional probability, given that we've got conditional probabilities, which is like you've got, I'm trying how to word this. I'll come back to that later. We've got expected value, which is outcome times probability, and then you add all of that answers to get the expected value. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions? These are like the extended version of the probability rules, but you won't get all of this. This is just so that you guys have an understanding of the basic foundation. Any questions, Tasnim?
No questions.
Okay, perfect. So I'll go over this question. Please do put in the chat if it's not making sense. A hospital charity raffle sells a total of 240 tickets to raise money for the children's ward. Every ticket has an equal chance of being drawn, and there is a single prize, which is drawn at random from all 240 tickets sold. A nurse working on the ward buys 50 of the tickets. Which of the following best describes the nurse's probability of winning the prize and her probability of not winning it? So I'm just going to give you guys a minute to think about how you guys would tackle this question, and then I'll go over it.
Sorry, we just got a question regarding VR, so verbal reasoning. Did we already have a verbal reasoning session, I think?
I think we did. I'm not too sure if we do have a recording of that session, but is there anything specific you'd like to ask?
If you guys have any specific question regarding VR, please send it
Regarding
in.
verbal reasoning, yes. Actually, I think verbal reasoning was hosted by Danielle, so I'll pass your questions on to him and get back to you.
Okay, so just how to improve your score, how to improve your reading speed, and the inference questions. All good questions.
So just like the basic strategies and tips and tricks, right?
Yeah.
That's definitely we could make like a cheat sheet up and then post it on our website, which you can access. I think that's something were considering doing? Is that something you're interested in? Because we can get that made up for you.
Yeah, we've gone, okay, sure, from Zainab.
Perfect. I'll take a note of that and then pass that on. But basically, for verbal reasoning, for the probability rules, I can also make a cheat sheet up and then pass that on if you guys want.
Could you just briefly repeat that? I think they want to.
Briefly repeat that, of course. Is there anything specific you want to repeat, or like all of them?
All
All
of
of them,
them.
okay. That's fine. So, like you guys already know, probability means favorable outcomes over total outcomes. Does that make sense? Yes, okay.
Yep.
So when a question says, and, what you should think is you should multiply. So whenever you see the keyword and in a question, just automatically think to yourself, okay, I'm going to need to multiply because it's both events happening. For example, if you roll a die, if the question says, what is the probability of you getting a head and another head in a row? What you should do is you need to multiply a half by a half in order to get a quarter. Does that make sense? I'll go really slow so that you guys understand. And then if a question says, or, you automatically think to yourself that you need to add because it's either events happening. For example, if the question says, what is the probability of rolling a dice and getting 1 or 2? What you should do is you add the probabilities. So you get 1 once in the die, and then you get 2 once in the dice. So you do 1 over 6 plus 1 over 6, and when you add those together, you get 2 over 6, which is the same as 1 over 3. Does that make sense? Is that making sense? Should I go? Yes, okay. And then the third one, when a question says not. So see, for example, if it says, what probability is it not of getting, 2 when you roll a die? You automatically think that you take 1 away from the probability. For example, take a quarter is 3 over 4. Does that make sense? And then when we're thinking of at least one, it's 1 take away none, because at least 1 head into flips is equal to 1 take 1 take a half times a half, which gives you 3/4. I don't know if I can write on the screen so that it's easier for you guys to see, because it might be
Do you want
confusing
me
when
to?
you're
I
saying it
can try
verbally.
brainstorming.
Yes, please.
Okay, so
So can you do 1?
that's thick. Sorry, guys. Let me just change this pen. He will not let me select it. Okay, I'm just gonna have to deal with this. Yep. What else?
1 take brackets a half a times a half.
This is this readable?
Yeah, it's readable.
Okay, half
It's
times a
just a
half.
little example, so don't overcomplicate this.
The correct answer is A.
We were going to go over this, sorry. We were just
Yeah.
going over the probability rules. We'll get it all sorted, don't worry, guys. And then that is equivalent to 3 over 4. I could go over this at the end if you still don't get it. So basically, when the question says at least one, it's one take none. And that's what you do. I can go over this at the very end if you're still unsure. And then the final rules with replacement. So when a question says you take a ticket out of a drawer and you put another ticket in, the probability stays the same. But if it's without replacement, the probabilities might change. And then we've got expected value, which is when you times the outcome by the probability and then you add all of them together. If this doesn't make sense, I will try look up a question and then explain it to you at the very end. I think we might be running out of time. So next slide, please. Can you go back? Yeah, thank you. So for this question, the answer was A. She has a 1 in 16 probability of winning and a 15 out of 16 probability of not winning. It's A because, like you can see, we've got this little equation that says favorable divided by total, which gives you 1 in 16, because the two outcomes, winning and not winning, are the only possibilities for this single draw, and they must sum up to 1. So P, not winning, equals 1 take 1 over 16 equals 15 over 16, equivalent to 225 out of 240. Both figures are calculated correctly, and the complement rule is applied properly. So here we're using the rule probability equals favorable outcomes. Does that make sense? If you guys do have any questions on probability, I don't mind going over this at the very end, because this is one of the harder questions. Perfect. I'll make up a sheet for these rules and share with you guys as well. But for now, I'm going to pass this to Tasnim to go over recognizing assumptions. Thank you.
Okay, hi guys. Now we're just going to be going through recognizing assumptions. So in front of you, there are two different questions independent of one another. I'm just going to read them and you guys can have a go at them. Should the government provide free public transport to children under 16? So you will always have four options, and most of the time there are two yes options and two no options. And in this case, we want to select the strongest argument from the statements below. So option A would be yes, free public transport would ease financial burdens on families and ensure equal access to education and extracurricular activities. Option B would be yes, children would be more environmentally conscious if they use public transport instead of private cars. Option C is no, providing free public transport would lead to overcrowding and decrease the quality of service for all passengers. And option D would be no, the government should prioritize spending on improving the educational system directly rather than public transport. So I'll give you guys a few seconds to just choose what you think is the strongest, and then I'll explain how I would go through it. Okay. I'm gonna start explaining how I'd go through it. So you think A? Okay. If you want, you can put your explanation, well, a brief explanation down. Yeah, and I'll be happy to read through that. But for these sort of questions, everyone will have their own opinion on what they think is appropriate, but we want to look at the reasoning and how strong the reasoning is in comparison to to the other options. So immediately what I would do is rule out D, because that D is just saying what some people's opinions may be, but there's no evidence behind it. It's no, the government should prioritize spending on improving the educational system. And the use of should in and of itself, I think, is too strong um, when trying to have an argument that is mm, that has a strong basis. And then I would probably go to C. Okay. So Akshara said it's because this benefits the children directly and access to learning. Those are good reasons, and I will get to that. And then we've got C. No, well, no providing access to will lead to overcrowding. I think most people would just rule this out immediately as well because we do need free public transport, and the reason itself is quite weak. Then B, yes, children would be more environmentally conscious. Well, that is a good reason. As Akshara said, A is the strongest reason. And I think it is the broadest reason given. So A is the right answer in this case. And then we've got the second question. Should homework be tailored to individual student needs? Um, I'll briefly read through the options and you guys choose what you think is appropriate. A, yes, individualized homework can address specific learning gaps and improve educational outcomes. B, no, tailoring homework to individual needs would require excessive time from teachers, which could be better spent on lesson planning. C, yes, students feel more motivated when homework is directly relevant to their personal interests. And then D, no, standardized homework ensures all students are treated equally and maintain a consistent level of education. Yeah, exactly as Stechana says, A is the only option that addresses every single part of that question. And also these sort of questions, they're pretty short. So while the general consensus is to spend maximum 1 minute per question, these questions, at least personally, I take a maximum of 30 seconds just so I can spend more time on the larger questions like we saw earlier. Okay. So the correct answer for this one would again be A. And for the same reasons as the other question, it addresses the question entirely, and it has the strongest reasoning. Okay, so with that, I'll move on to the next question. So now we've got Venn diagrams. Venn diagrams, you either love them or you hate them. I was actually the former because what I would suggest people do is just draw a Venn diagram. You between your sections in mock test and the actual test, you will have a minute to spend on just having a debrief and calming down. But what I found myself doing was just drawing a Venn diagram in advance, just so I wouldn't have to rush and worry about what it looks like during the actual question itself. So the text can look quite chunky, but because the data is categorical, all you really have to do is put numbers in circles, and it really isn't as bad as it looks like. So I'll just read through the question, and you guys might want to draw out a Venn diagram in the meanwhile. So 50 students were asked which types of cultural visits had they made in the last year: cinema, theatre, museum. All students had made at least one visit. So immediately that tells us that there'll be nothing outside of the circles. Everything will be contained within the Venn diagram. Then we've got no student had been to the theatre and the cinema. Um, I'll come back to what that means. I'll just carry on going through the rest of it. 10 students had been to the cinema and the museum. Twice as many had been to the theatre and the museum. 9 students had been to just the museum. 7 students had been to just the cinema. So if you guys want to make a quick note of the numbers that you've got, and I'll explain in a bit. Obviously, with Venn diagrams, you do have a question at the end, but because you've got so much data, it's always better to jot down what you do know and then go to the question. Um, but yeah, feel free to have a glance at the question itself. how many more students had made a visit to the museum than had made a visit to the theatre. Okay, so I'm gonna start going through the rest of the statements. So we've already said all students had made at least one visit, so everything's contained within the circles. Then we go to no student had been to the theatre and the cinema. That means the intersection between cinema and theatre is completely empty. So both parts there will be a zero. So I don't know if you can see here. Between cinema and theatre, this and this will be zero. Then we go to the next statement, which is 10 students had been to the cinema and the museum, which means the intersection between those two sections or those two circles will be 10. And then we also know twice as many had been to the theatre and the museum. Likewise, you look between theatre and museum at the intersection, and it will be 20 people have went. Then 9 students had been to just the museum. So when you're told it's just the museum, that means it can't, you put that number where it does not cross over with any other of the sections. So, oh, well, it's revealing a zero, but here you can see the 9 is in museum. And then we have 7 students had been to just the cinema. So you put 7 within the exclusive cinema part. And then with that information, you can work out how many students went to the theatre. So you just do subtraction in this case, and you will end up with 4 remaining students that weren't taken into account. With all this information, yeah, you can work out how many students had made a visit to the museum, then had made a visit to the theatre. And like Akshara said, I'm pretty sure the correct answer would be A in this case. Oh, no, sorry, B. I'll explain that real quick. Easy mistake to make, I suppose. So we look at how many students had made a visit to the museum. You count that up. So you can see 10 students went to the cinema and museum, and then you add the 20 who went to the theatre and museum, and then those that just went to the museum on its own. So 10 plus 20 plus 9, 39. And then we count out how many people went to the theatre. So we can see 4, and then you just add the 20 from the museum and theatre. So 24. Oh, so then you end up with 39, take away 24, which would give you 15. So easy mistakes to make if you add up a bit wrong, but I think the more practice you get, the better you will get at solve questions. I'm glad that makes sense. Okay, so I'll be moving on if we don't have any questions. Okay. And then we've got the section called Interpreting Information. And this section is a bit wordy, so there are a few more text boxes to read here. But like basically speaking, it is just a bunch of yes or no questions. You will like move a box to a bunch of statements and agree if the statement follows, or put no if the statement doesn't follow. These questions do tend to be very chunky, very big. So if it does seem overwhelming, then feel free to flag these questions and come back to them. But they are worth a lot of marks. So always attempt these questions. You get 2 marks if you get all the statements correct, and you get 1 mark if you get at least 4 of them correct. So what I would do to approach these sort of questions is always just read the question first, because the text or the data given can be large, as I have said. So read the question, see what they want, and then pick out what they actually want from the text, rather they just skim over it, basically. And just look at each of the answers separately, because the answers can be very similar. It is very easy to mix them up, but always take it one at a time and see what you do know for certain and try and work from there. Always look for evidence. So just to start things off, we've got this passage. It's pretty small, and I just want you guys to think, what is the supported statement here? So, a hospital introduced a new appointment reminder system. Missed appointments decreased by 15% over 6 months, although patient satisfaction remained unchanged. So, which statement from the right is supported? Patient satisfaction increased, missed appointments decreased, the hospital employed more staff, or waiting times fell. Yeah, so this question is pretty simple, but it just tests the fact that you do not make assumptions. You don't want to make assumptions in any part of decision making, and definitely not here. So yeah, the correct answer in this case would be B, decreased by 15%. I will come back to this, but these are common pitfalls made, especially in this section. Instead, we're going to start with the question. So here you can see this question is a bit more data-based. You've got a graph on the left, and you've got the statements on the right. So I'll just read through it. The grid shows a plot of the leadership styles of 5 managers. Both the x-axis and the y-axis have a range of 0 to 9. And then we've got a graph, which you guys might want to look at real quick. So you can see the x-axis shows concern for production, and the y-axis shows concern for people. And there are 5 different leaders and 5 names plotted along this graph. And the question is just to select the yes or no options for the statements. So you might want to read through the statements. I think for these sort of questions as well, it is good to take your time and to interpret the graph, because if you do mess up, you are unlikely to get any of the statements correct. Okay, so for an example, I'll just look at Jack. So we can see Jack is in the top left corner, and in this case, that means his concern for production is relatively low at 1. But his concern for people is completely bad. You can look at the other names and the other leaders and try and deduct what's true and what's not. So the first question is, Jerome's leadership style is the hardest to diagnose. Whether do you guys think that's true or not? Just be careful when giving an answer, because diagnosis is not talked about in the question. Yep, it's a no. So it's not talked about in the question, and you cannot assume, as said earlier, you can't assume a certain leadership style is harder to diagnose than another. So the option would be no. Then we've got the second statement. Emily's leadership style is heavily task-oriented and autocratic. Akshara, yes. Why do you think that? Again, be careful with what we know. Do we know what her specific type of leadership style? We do know, we can see here. Okay, she scored high in concern for production. That is true. Emily, we can see her concern for production is the maximum, so 9, and her concern for people is low, 1. But in this case, you would be wrong, because there's no explicit statement saying that she is heavily task-oriented and autocratic. So you would have made an assumption, and unfortunately, yeah, it's a no. Yeah. It's a tough one because it would make sense, but we can't assume that's the case. So just be careful there. And then we've got the third statement. Jack's human-oriented approach makes him the most efficient manager. So using that last statement and what happened, what do you think the answer is for this one? Yeah, it's a no. So, and then the fourth statement. Emily displays the greatest fear of jeopardizing relationships with team members. Okay, so if you can find Emily again. High concern for production, low concern for people. But does it say anything about relationships or her fear of jeopardizing relationships? No. So again, the most rational thing would be to put down no. So I think the more you do these sort of questions, the more you realize it's more just making sure you don't jump to a conclusion and just always go back to that data that they've given you. So yeah, no again. And then the last one is Sean's team has great potential to be productively efficient while being motivated and satisfied. Is that a yes or a no? Well, we can see Sean here is high in concern for people and high in concern for production. Yeah, this one, it can seem like a no, but in this case, it's actually a yes, and I will explain why. So Sean here, the statement is a bit misleading, but if you read it carefully, it says Sean's team has great potential to be productively efficient while being motivated and satisfied. The main part of that is potential. And yes, we cannot assume at this current moment that they are efficient and motivated and satisfied. Um, it is showing that his concern for production is high and his concern for people is high. So because it's not a definitive statement, this one is a yes. The Yeah, definitely. The main part is the keywords. So yeah, keywords and just don't make assumptions. That's the main part for these sort of questions. Is that okay with everyone? I'm gonna take that as a yes and move on. Okay, so these are our top tips for decision making in general. So as I've just said, stick strictly to the information provided, and as the channel showed you guys, if we extrapolate information too far, yeah, they trip you up. That is the main thing. So always just stick to
Sorry, I'm
it.
just going to interrupt you for a second. Can you please go over the common pitfalls for
Oh,
interpreting information,
sorry,
please?
I'll go back.
Thank you.
Don't worry. Let's go back to back we go. Okay, pitfalls, especially for this last section that we've been through. We wanna avoid assuming things. Throughout the whole thing, I think we've mentioned this a dozen of times, but it is the main thing that trips people up. So try not to do that. And especially when you're practicing these sort of questions, try and be aware of what you're thinking and why you're thinking that. We want to avoid using outside knowledge. So as Tashana said earlier, if they say fishes can fly, then fishes can fly. At least for that question, believe what they say, even if you know otherwise. Then we've got choosing an answer because it's mostly true. Again, I think this kind of relates to the keywords. Um, if they want an absolute answer, they will normally give you always an always statement or a never statement, something along the lines of that. So just really read the statement carefully because one word can change what the answer could be. And then the fourth point would be extrapolating data given. So what that means is just with data or even text sometimes, you don't want to assume more than that what's given to you. So again, this comes back to assumptions. And then the fifth point for just to avoid, don't read too much or too little into wording. So quantifiers like always, only, and must. These are again absolute statements, and they're keywords you always should look out for because again, these are it's easy to trip up on these, and I know there's a lot of text most of the time, but with these quantifiers, you don't want to just skim read them. You want to understand what they're coming from. So if it says, I don't know, uh, Sam went to rugby on Saturday, um, and then the statement is Sam must go to rugby on, I don't know, Sunday. Obviously, that's not true. But the main part of that statement would be must, that quantify. Always look out for those words that could change the statement's meaning. And then instead of doing all of that, base every answer on the information provided. Look for direct support in text. So always look for evidence, look for the data, look for the information that links to that statement or the question, and treat each option independently. So when you've got numerous statements, always look at them with kind of a different mind. You don't want to try and link those statements together because that's when people slip up and they just treat them as individual questions basically. And then remember, some does not mean most. This again comes back to the quantifiers. So when you've got some of and I don't know, some of the coffee, for example, and most of the coffee, they are very similar terms, but most always means the majority of, while some can mean a less amount. So some is very vague in comparison to most. So just look out for those sort of one word differences. Okay. And then I think we'll go back to the top tips now. Oh, Sorry, guys. Tatiana, do you want to go through the top tips?
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yep, can hear you now.
Perfect. So, just general top tips. Stick strictly to the information provided. We cannot tell you enough about like sticking to the information that's provided in the question. Please do not assume things. I know it's so easy to assume things based off your outside knowledge, but please do not do that. Treat each statement independently. Like you may have seen when I was going over the questions, just go over each statement and like extract all of the information and then go on to the answer options. Look for evidence, not assumptions. If you think that this answer might be correct, go back to the question, look for evidence to support that argument. If not, do not assume things. Watch out for extreme wording, also known as quantifiers, such as always, never, every, only, must. If they're extreme, they're probably not true. Separate facts from interpretations. This one you should all learn how to do. Facts are those ones stated in the questions, and then interpretations is the ones that you can kind of gather based off the information provided, and only if they follow a chronological order. And then read one statement at a time. That's just common sense. Be very careful, like open your eyes, be very active and attentive to the question. Don't be scared to flag and skip questions. Be strict with time. Yes, skip, move on. They're all not with the same marks. They're not all of the same difficulty. So be very careful with questions you choose to answer because you don't have enough time. Use your whiteboard, please. And also, there are some common pitfalls in this section specifically. Reversing statements. For example, in syllogisms, when they say all A are B, that is not equivalent to not all B are A. And confusing possible with certain. Ignoring words like exactly, at least, at most, unless, like quantifiers. Ignoring keywords. Over solving puzzles instead of finding the answers. See, when you're doing logical puzzles, just solve the puzzle until you get the answer. Do not try to solve the entire puzzle. It is impossible to solve an entire puzzle in a minute. Choosing answers that sound right but lack evidence. Like said in the top tips, look for evidence. Do not assume things when choosing the answer. Forgetting groups can overlap. In syllogisms and Venn diagrams, just keep in mind they can sometimes overlap. Not checking if the conclusion is supported, especially in syllogisms and interpreting questions. Please make sure that the conclusion is supported by the evidence from the question, and spending too long on one question. Like I said, flag, skip questions. Be very strict with times. And also, changing answers without a clear reason. Stick to your gut feeling. It sounds scary, but honestly, I've stuck to my gut feeling and I've got some of the questions right. So please do not try to overthink everything. And I think someone was unsure about probability. So I can go over probability, the two rules specifically. So we've got the not probability rule, which is when not something equals one take something. For example, the possibility of not something is equivalent to one take the possibility of something. So you know how probability is always between 0 and 1? 1 represents everything that can happen, like 100%. If you know the chance of something happening, the chance of it not happening is whatever is left. For example, the probability of raining is 0.3%. The probability of not raining is going to be 0.7%, which is 70%. Does that make sense? I'm just assuming that's making sense because I've got no questions.
That makes sense.
And then we've got another probability rule, which is at least one. So the possibility of at least one equals one take the possibility of none, like nothing. So at least one means 1, 2, 3, 4, anything above 0, basically. It is usually easier to calculate the opposite. The opposite of at least one is none. So the possibility that at least something is about to happen is 1, take the possibility of nothing is about to happen. Does that make sense? So just like a little trick to remember this, when it says not, subtract from 1, and if it says at least 1, find none first. I'm just assuming that it makes sense. If not, I'll try and make up a little sheet with all of the probability rules. Do not overcomplicate this. I'm just going over probabilities specifically because that was one of the most requested ones. So I was just making sure that this session was somewhat useful for the people attending. That's everything from my side. Anything else, Tess?
No, but good luck with your practice, everyone. It'll be over before you know it, so try and focus while you can.
Oh, I've got someone raising their hand. Oh, also, guys, please make sure to fill in the feedback form. And if you guys do want a little demo of our website, we can go over that as well.
Yes, I think let's attempt one of the two questions on the platform now. So could you please allow me to present? Just give me a second. So
yes.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, so not this one. Just give me a second. Sharing my screen in a bit. So let's go with this. Okay, so can you guys see my screen? Perfect. So, guys, we're going to attempt one of the questions in probability, and I would need your support in terms of solving the questions, and just unmute your mic to answer those. So this is basically the platform. These are the mock exams. Just go over that. So this is the verbal reasoning practice set, decision making. So let's go with probabilistic and statistical reasoning. So I have like 50% accuracy. So let's go with the timed version. Let's start the set. So it's going to create our two-facet set for us. Okay, so let's start this. Just read this question out and just let me know. Unmute your mic so that I know like what the answer is. Tasneem or Tatiana.
Sorry, what was it?
Just a random guess. Just a random guess. Let's go with this for now.
Oh, a random guess. Okay.
Yes. Let's go with B for now. And for the next question, just compare pressure. So this is not a demo of like how to solve a question, but exactly about what the platform is, right? So let's need to keep it short. Let's go with next. So we have done with this. You could review your cases as per the UCAT as well. So end review, and this is what we got. So we got like 50% again, which is so let's review the answers. So this one, I think this is correct, and let's go with the next one. So this is this one. So most of the people on the platform at the moment, they're using this explain with AI feature because they would simply really want to know like how to solve this question, right? So I would click on this explain with AI. It will take all of my, the question, how to solve this stuff, exactly what should we do and what shouldn't we do. Incorrectly by choosing option B, explanation of the correct answer, calculate the incidence rate for ward 1. So we're going to, it's going to calculate this thing for us. So what if we're gonna know, like, is there any faster method or how to spot the traps, right? Let's spot the traps. So let's click on this. What is the commentator? Okay. Okay, so many students mistakenly compare the raw number of affected patients instead of the rates, right? This can lead to incorrect conclusion, as a higher count does not necessarily means a worse performance if the total number of patients is also considered. So focus on raw counts, and then ignoring the total population size. This is some of the common traps and tempting wrong options, right? So most of us would definitely want to know like what exactly the faster method is. So this is basically trained on a very specific UCAT, like the thinking, and the people who have like created this stuff, they have like literally aced the UCAT, right? So they know what they're doing. So when you're under time pressure, you can simply use shortcut to quickly compare incidence rate without needing to perform detailed calculations. So convert to common denominator, use basic ratios, step-by-step shortcuts. So just go over this explain with AI tutor so that you would know like what exactly to attempt, right? So back to our list. So this is only one of the sets. Perform the other sets. Go with the mock exams as well. At the moment, mock exams are super hot on our platform.